This guy right here, this is a guy named Steven Anderson. He is what I would call a Christian hate preacher. He has said a bunch of horrible things. Listen, this whole segment, there are so many clips I would love to show you of what this dude has said in the past. And I can't because if I played those clips, my whole channel would get demonetized and destroyed. So I'm just going to tell you the gist of things he said in the past. He is a new independent fundamentalist Baptist preacher, basically lives in his own little world. He's not connected to a larger movement. But this is a guy from Arizona who has said, like, he celebrated the deaths of murdered LGBTQ people. He has called on the government to execute gay people with the firing squad. He is so horrible in terms of the stuff he has said that 34 countries won't let him step foot within their borders anymore. And his acolytes include people like Jonathan Shelley and Aaron Thompson, who, if you look on my YouTube channel, a few months ago, I actually sat down for a very long, like 3-hour interview with those two dudes. Just the things they say are truly despicable. But more than anything, Steven Anderson is like the ringleader of the new IFB movement. Like on paper, these guys say we're all about the KJV Bible and, we're Bible believing, independent, whatever. In reality, and I've watched way too many of their sermons because I absolutely hate myself, all they ever seem to do, or at least more often than you would ever want them to, expect them to rather, they trash LGBTQ people, they trash Jewish people, they hate effeminate men. Everyone they deem to be heretical, they just go after every time. You will not hear them talk about like Jesus wants us to help the poor. No, it's always using slurs against gay people in like every sermon, no matter what the topic is. Okay, so why do I bring up Steven Anderson? Because, well, earlier this year, I found out, maybe it was a year ago, and I posted about this at the time. I may have made a video about it. I learned that one of his kids, Isaac, who is the second oldest of Stephen's 12 children, he has 12. The second oldest, that kid was a full blown Nazi. He had a war eagle tattoo on his chest and everything. Like, I've listened to a lot of Steven Anderson, and I've heard him downplay the Holocaust. He's a Holocaust denier in the sense that he thinks the numbers of people killed are completely wrong. But I've never thought of him as like a Nazi supporter. I've never thought of him as racist. And when I asked him, hey, you know me, I'm the guy who writes about you all the time. What's the deal with your son, Isaac? Because this is messed up. Steven Anderson did write back to me, and he said, how dare I attack his son? That's unethical. No. And then he told me he wasn't personally racist or pro Hitler, but he would not tell me that his son was wrong, which is telling. But okay, that was Isaac. I found that disturbing. I didn't think much about it after that because I'm like, see, this is what happens when you have a guy like Steven Anderson preaching. His kids might take it even further. Look at what happened with Isaac, right? That's disturbing stuff. But then earlier this year in January, and maybe Den, you could find this while I'm talking. Back in January of this year, there is a YouTuber named deaddomain, Domain, and deaddomain did an interview with Isaac. And I watched it because I'm like, what is Isaac going to say in this video? And honestly, a lot of what he talked about was just here's how I came to my beliefs about everything. And it wasn't really about anything hateful. I mean, Isaac admitted everything I just told you about his beliefs. They are truly disturbing. He wasn't apologizing for any of it, but he offered more of his backstory. And in that backstory, he talked about his troubling home life in which he was raised. He said he was still a Christian, obviously, but he spoke about being physically abused by his parents. He said that he plans to hit his own kids when he has them, even though he admitted that corporal punishment has its limitations because he was hit as a child and he doesn't think it was right. He's still going to do it, just like not as bad. I guess if there was anything surprising about the video, the interview with Isaac, it's that he kind of came across as a normal guy with a tough upbringing. Kind of like how, like, this week in the debate, JD Vance came across as a normal dude until you start listening to what he says, and then it's really disturbing. That's Isaac. Like, he just seemed like a guy who's had a rough life. And so maybe I'm not surprised that he took that route. But that's the thing about extremists, right? Like, what makes them so dangerous is that they can often seem sensible on the surface. So that interview took place in January, and it was disturbing for some reasons, but enlightening, I guess, in other ways. And then I didn't think about it anymore because, again, I've already talked about Isaac. And then last month, something else unusual happened. Dead Domain posted an interview with someone named John Anderson. And John Anderson, I'll share this with you here. John Anderson is the third oldest of Stephen's 12 kids. This is John Anderson here. He did an interview with Dead Domain as well. Why? Because he watched Isaac's interview and he said, I'm willing to talk to you too about all this stuff. And he wanted to share his own story and make the case. And this is interesting. He wanted to make the case for why his parents, Stephen Anderson and his wife, should not have any contact with his siblings, including the 8 who still lived at home. Like, John was not a bad dude at all when you watch this interview. John basically said, yeah, the abuse that I suffered at the hands of Stephen Anderson and his mother, Susanna Anderson, he said it was really bad. Dead Domain introduced that video, and this is disturbing, so bear with me. The allegations that John made in the interview included closed fist beatings, whippings with electrical cords, insulting and belittling children as young as 6, starvation as punishment, and exposure to the elements. Like, telling your kid, locking your kid outside the house when it's freezing cold out. And John said that when he began calling out his parents on, quote, their bullshit, he was basically kicked out of the house. And he's currently not allowed to speak to his siblings. He actually moved out when he was 18 and he's no longer welcome at home. And John said he had reported his parents to local authorities, but whatever they did, it wasn't enough. Nothing really happened. He also said his parents don't really like each other. And he attributed that to his parents dating for, get this, a grand total of 2 weeks before they got married. And also, they came from very different backgrounds, which makes it even harder to bond in such a short amount of time. And part of that didn't bother me because, like, listen, a lot of people stay together even if they're not in love and even if they're constantly fighting, especially in fundamentalist circles. But you can see why it's very easy for Stephen Anderson to basically run the house the way he sees fit. John also mentioned that his 17-year-old sister was very unsafe in that home and, quote, she was trying to get away and my dad is trying to catch her right now and bring her back against her will. And by the way, he also said he's also 100% Christian. So after that video occurred, what was weird is that all the new IFB preachers basically came to Stephen Anderson's defense. Stephen Anderson made a video, which I think he deleted, but he accused his son of telling outright lies. And then, like, this is getting to 2 weeks ago or so, Jonathan Shelley, one of those other IFB preachers, he did a podcast where he said he wanted to speak out because, it's not fair for Stephen Anderson to speak out about his family. But Jonathan Shelley said, look, I talked to Stephen Anderson all about the allegations of abuse and love and all that stuff. And I came to the conclusion that Stephen Anderson should not step down from the pulpit. He is still a good pastor. Well, what about all the abuse allegations, right? Jonathan Shelley said the kids are probably exaggerating. That was the word he used, exaggerating. He said they probably just didn't like being punished. They were being manipulated. They suffered from insecurity, and that they shouldn't talk to YouTubers who were using them because the internet, Jonathan Shelley said, allows them to air out a lot of dumb stuff. What about Dead Domain, the interviewer in all these cases? Shelley wrote in the video's description, this reprobate is taking advantage of Pastor Anderson's kids, and I hope they realize this and repent. They are not repenting. Anyway, so a day after that, I guess Jonathan Shelley reached out to John Anderson, the kid, and he's like, "Do you want to have a conversation about this?" And John said, "Sure." And John was driving in the car when this phone call came in, and John decided to record their entire conversation. This is a 30-minute video on John Anderson's website. Again, I wish I could play you this, but it's not just like one clip to show you. There's so much to listen to here. And I went down the rabbit hole and listened to all of it this week. But this is like a 30-minute phone call where basically John talks to Jonathan Shelley about everything that has just transpired. I don't know if it's legal to record people, but whatever, that's a separate issue. Um, in their conversation, which Shelley did not know was being recorded, he basically admitted Steven Anderson is violent and that his excuses do not contradict anything that John was saying. But he still downplayed all those allegations. And the reason Jonathan Shelley was wanting to talk to John in the first place is because he was hoping the kid could seek some reconciliation with his parents. And John said he wasn't going to do that unless his dad apologized for lying to his congregation about being abusive. And it didn't look like that apology was forthcoming. And this is the part that really got to me. When it came to the allegations that Steven Anderson physically abused his wife as well, which is something John brought up, what did Jonathan Shelley say? He said, "I talked to your dad, I talked to Steven Anderson, and he says that anything he did to his wife, I'm quoting here, was consensual and that it was behind closed doors." That was in reference to physical abuse. Steven Anderson said it was consensual. Like, how is physical abuse ever consensual? And if it happens behind closed doors, how does that make it okay? Like, I wasn't asking for him to do it behind like a glass box or something. Like, it's just a ridiculous thing to say about physical abuse. But that is apparently all Jonathan Shelley needed to hear to be like, well, I guess you could still be a pastor at one of our churches. John pointed out, the son pointed out to Jonathan Shelley, his mom had told him she wants to get divorced. She wants custody of all the kids, even though that's really hard for like one woman with no outside the house career and 12 kids. But the reason that would never happen is because all of those older siblings said, "We're not just going to testify against our dad. We would testify against you too, because you were just as guilty in terms of the abuse we suffered." And that's the reason she's not going to court to break out of this relationship, according to John. And what did Jonathan Shelley, the pastor, say about all that? Every woman is irrational, and every woman runs her mouth, and every woman says the dumbest crap. Seriously, older man saying that about women. Anyway, it was a disturbing conversation. Glad it was recorded so we could hear it. But the biggest thing is Jonathan Shelley just ignored what he acknowledged was physical abuse. Like, if it was done in private, apparently anything goes. And I'm not done yet, because guess what? Last week, guess what else happened? Dead Domain posted another interview with another child of Steven Anderson. And this time he interviewed Miriam Anderson, who is the oldest daughter in the family. And she's also the one John brought up earlier because she had been trying to get away from the family. And her story is like, I want to give this person just a giant hug if that's allowed, because it was just so terrifying. Many of the recollections Miriam brought up, I mean, they echoed what her brothers said earlier about how abuse occurred at home. She even mentioned specific pieces of equipment in their kitchen that were used against them. She talked about how she had thoughts about ending her life from the age of 11 onward. I mean, just horrible stuff. Her brother's stories, she said, were 100% true. And interestingly enough, she mentioned how during a summer camp she attended, she was talking to friends there. She let details about her home life slip out, and a counselor there heard it. And that counselor was a mandated reporter. So they had to tell Child Protective Services. And guess what happened after CPS got involved? It only made the drama at home worse, because now her parents were mad that other people knew about what was happening inside their home. So Miriam decided to go live with her aunt and uncle in South Carolina, totally across the country, other side of it. The uncle is Steven Anderson's brother. She went to go live with them. She told her parents she wasn't going to come home. And like to try to alleviate their anger, ease their anger, she said, I'm not going to go public about this, but I don't want to come back home. What did they do in response? Well, she was still on their, like they were still paying for her phone and laptop. So they cut her off entirely so she can't communicate with the outside world. She was 17. She is 17 as all this is happening. Just really disturbing. She also told a really scary story from this year about how she found out her dad was coming to South Carolina to take her back home. And she had to spend it was a crazy 24, 48 hours to try to avoid him. She said she was hiding in a ditch. She went to a hospital, checked into a hospital because he couldn't get her in there. She also pointed out that she's a Christian too, just not the type of Christian he is. And in fact, she said she's a Christian despite her parents because they make her doubt her religion more than anything else she's ever done. It wasn't until she met decent Christians that she was drawn to the faith. And so after Miriam spoke out this past week, Steven Anderson made another video. What's amazing is that Steven Anderson is banned on YouTube, but he still keeps using sock puppet accounts, which he's not allowed to do, to just put up other videos, or his followers put up videos. But basically, he made a video where he just doxed the hell out of his brother who lives in South Carolina, puts up phone numbers of everyone involved, says that his brother stole his daughter Miriam, which is not true. She says she went to live with them because she just felt safer there. And then he writes in the description of the video, that is where I believe she is still being kept against our will. She is a minor, not old enough to consent. And then throughout the video, it just keeps giving away her location and practically encouraging people to harass his brother. That's how disturbing it is. Miriam, as far as I can tell, is no longer in South Carolina. I'm not sure why she left, if she left to get away from her dad. But this is something she posted on Facebook, basically responding to all of this. And it's long. I'm not going to read the whole thing. But one thing that's really disturbing is she says she met her boyfriend at a church in South Carolina. They hit it off. She actually got her dad's permission to get coffee with him the next morning before they went soul winning together. And he talked to my dad. He's been listening to my dad's sermons. He asked my dad's permission to date me. And he came to visit. But when her dad came to visit her, it basically ruined her relationship. Where is that? It's right in the middle here. Everyone who met him liked him immediately, but they ruined our relationship. He can no longer come to see me because I'm not living in South Carolina anymore. Her dad coming to steal her meant he couldn't hang around her the boyfriend couldn't hang around anymore. She also says my uncle did not steal me. She says all this stuff. Again, I hope she's okay. I'm not sure where she is, but I hope she's safe. Dead Domain told me she seems to be doing okay, and I'm really happy to hear that. I hope that's the case. I did want to play one video for you, which is this past Sunday, Steven Anderson did his usual Sunday sermon. He does 2 a week. And I'm going to play for you a clip from that sermon. Also disturbing, also very predictable, but he's not happy that everyone's going public about how horrible he is. Here is a clip from the sermon. I forgot if it's edited, if I tried to splice together a few things, but you'll see it if it's there.
My accusers teamed up with a literal Satan-worshiping transvestite. Amen. Okay, and you know what? We could pretty much almost just close our Bibles and go home right now. Okay? Because anybody with a brain in their head knows that you don't go to Satan to tell the truth. You go to Satan because you want to tell lies. Okay? The guy is in drag. He is a man dressed up as a woman. The video that all these Christians are promoting this week and sending around all over the internet, literally you click on it. The first thing you're going to see is a man in makeup in a flowery dress with a Satan symbol. But isn't it interesting that all three of them, they all went to a transvestite, open faggot, reprobate. And you know why? Because God is showing people who's telling the truth and who's lying. That's why. Anybody who actually loves the Lord and loves the truth can easily figure out the truth because God in his providence worked it out where my enemies were too stupid to actually attack me in a way that could even be seen as legitimate, but they all went straight to literal Satan so that everybody who actually cares about the truth and what the Bible says will know that they're lying because Satan is the father of lies. Amen. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 28, verse 6.
Always got to go back to the Bible. Sorry that was so loud. I'll make it quieter when I upload this. But yeah, he's not handling this well. Did you notice that he's calling his own kids like accusers? Like, what a weird way to talk about your kids. For what it's worth, I asked Dead Domain, "Hey, are you a literal Satan worshiping transvestite?" And the answer was no. Also, not literally Satan. Not how the word literally works. I just want to let me publicly shout out and give my appreciation to Dead Domain for just all that incredible work. Because in addition to those interviews they posted with those kids, the kids obviously have enough trust to share their stories with this person on YouTube. Dead Domain has also posted like separate commentary on all of these details. I would not know anything I'm sharing with you if not for Dead Domain. So I just want to give a huge shout out to them for doing all this work. Dead Domain told me this week, we chatted on the phone, they're still in contact with the Andersons' kids, but that may not last because for all the positive support people like John Anderson have received for speaking out, there is also targeted harassment against those kids. It may be easier for them to keep quiet than subjecting themselves to disaster by speaking out against their dad. I mean, it's hard enough to revisit your traumatic childhood. Imagine how much worse it is when your own father is condemning you to his cult followers in real time. And also, you know, the next oldest kid is also a minor still at home. So we're probably not going to see any interviews about that. Dead Domain was urging people to contact local authorities. Maybe Dead Domain told me, I really hope that these allegations can get law enforcement or CPS to do a proper investigation so these kids and their stories and their safety can be taken more seriously. And so in a way, I guess, I mean, this is a heartbreaking story, but it's also uplifting in a way. Uplifting because at least two of those kids do not share the worst characteristics of their father. And they also want the public to know what their lives have been like. And they are bursting the bubble that their daddy has kept around them for years. Like, I always knew his version of Christianity is a nightmare, but it turns out his theology isn't just awful to people like me. It's awful to his own flesh and blood. And if those kids can escape that environment, and they sure as hell are trying, and they come out as apparently decent as they are, there's so much hope for other people in that situation. I just hate that they have to play it cautiously because of who this guy is and what he's capable of. Like, no one should have to fear harm from their own parents. But when your parents place the idea of God's word over common sense and basic human decency, you got to hope these kids find solace and safety somewhere. I did reach out to Steven Anderson to see if he had any other comment on these more recent videos. This time he did not respond to me, but we'll see if he responds anymore. I will leave it at that for now. What questions we got? I got one more story for you after this. But for now, how many kids does Anderson have? Steven Anderson has 12. Got the dozen, and now I don't know if he's done. If he was caught acting on the ideas he pushes, he'd be sentenced to life in prison. Here's the thing about Steven Anderson and Jonathan Shelley and Aaron Thompson and all those guys. They strike me as very much like Trump in this way. They know how to incite others to do things they would never do themselves. I don't actually think those guys are personally violent to strangers. I don't think they would like go looking for a fight. That's different from like the physical abuse at home. But the reason I was willing to interview them in person is because I didn't think I was going to be in danger talking to them. They don't strike me as those types of people. But as I pointed out to them, when they say things like gay people deserve to be executed because the Bible commands it, and that it would be totally fine to do if we had a righteous government, as I've said to them, and as I've said many times without them, that sort of thing, you don't know who's listening to that message, who wants to become a vigilante and take the law into their own hands. And that's the same thing. I don't think Steven Anderson would do the things he says, but I wouldn't put it past some of his followers to follow up on that and try to become a hero and a martyr for the cause. And there has been an instance, and I brought this up during my interview with those guys, where one of the guys that visited Aaron Thompson's church was arrested with weapons on his way to a pride parade. That could have ended badly. That guy was arrested ahead of time, but that guy was a member of Thompson's church. And it's like, what would have happened here? Because my guess is Aaron Thompson, had something bad happen, would not have said, well, that guy was a bad egg. He's a horrible person. No, they would have celebrated that guy. Like, God must have had a plan for him. Oh, well. So that's my fear. I'm less concerned about Anderson outside his home than I am about the people who follow people like that, because I don't know what crazy things they might be doing. You can hear the rage in his voice. Yeah, he's always at an 11, never gets any lower, even when he's talking about normal stuff. He gets mad about everything. Teaching children to be bigots should be considered child abuse, an awful thing to do to a child. Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you. I mean, I know how I talk to my kids, and I mean, I feel like I'm not as careful as other people are in terms of what I say around them. And even I'm like, oh my God, I would be horrified if they ever got these thoughts that any of this sort of thing would be okay. I cannot imagine hitting my kids over anything. Like, I'll stare at them with like an evil death stare, but my God, would never put my hands on them. And I cannot, for the life of me, imagine how some parents can do that sort of thing.